Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. It is Wednesday, March 25th, and we're glad to have you tonight. Glad that you can join us for this moment of connection during a time when we're all being asked to socially isolate or socially distance, I should say. As I've talked about it in previous episodes of this series, this can present some really common challenges for all of us because it is in our connections that we make it through our pain, our difficulty, and our grief. And there's kind of a collective grief that's happening in our country. I've read some articles about this idea that this is really a big loss for all of us. Somebody was sharing with me today that they didn't realize how much they were simply escaping by going out of the house, by going out to restaurants, by doing things that we all took for granted just 2 weeks ago. So what we wanted to create for all of you is this portal, if you will, this place where we can all connect. And in addition to the connection, one of the things that's happening during this time is that our nervous systems are becoming upregulated. And so part of this, I said this last night, Dakota, welcome.
Thank you.
And I said this recently. Wouldn't it be amazing if right before the news broadcast during this pandemic, if somebody came on and led a 2 minute or a 3 minute breathing or meditation exercise? I know it would make for really bad TV, but I think a lot of people could benefit from it today in the world and in our country. So, with all of that as a preamble, what I did is I invited one of our field instructors on this evening. He just got out of the field yesterday, so he just spent 8 days in the field with students, with clients, and now he has volunteered to help lead us in a meditation this evening. So, in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Dakota Huffman, and I'm going to invite Dakota to share with us some ideas, lead us through a brief exercise, a brief meditation that he's going to share with us. And then after he's done and maybe a few concluding words, he's going to turn it back over to me. So, again, finally, welcome, Dakota. Glad you could join us, and thanks for providing this for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. And I'm thankful for you giving me this opportunity. And I'm thankful for everybody else who's signed on and has decided to show up for themselves as well tonight. And so hopefully my intention with the next 10 minutes or so will be to provide you an opportunity to slow down at a time where it feels like things are developing so quickly, and an opportunity to relax our nervous systems. Um, and so this idea of mindfulness and breathing practices is something that we do in the field. And I've been practicing this in the field for about 4 years now. And when we talk about this idea of mindfulness, it's a buzzword. And as Brad alluded to in the last few webinars, it's an opportunity to not silence the mind or to find a different destination with the mind, but to rather just be present with the journey in the here and the now. And so an anchor that we can find in the storm is our breath. And so tonight we're going to be exploring and hopefully connecting with that breath. And so, and I invite you all to find relief in knowing that regardless of where your mind goes tonight, as long as we're practicing this deep belly breathing and connecting with the breath itself, there's deeply rooted physiological changes happening in our brains and in our nervous systems. And so just know that there's powerful work being done just in breathing alone. And so without any more ado, let's get started. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position, whether it's seated or laying down. We're going to begin by connecting with our base, whether that's your sit bones, your feet, if you're laying down your back. Just taking a moment to acknowledge and appreciate the support that this earth is providing us, all of our weight supported against the ground. And I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, or simply softening or lowering your gaze, relaxing your eyelids, your forehead, your jaw. And I'll simply notice the natural rhythm of your breath without changing it. Noticing, where does the breath go in the body? Is it fast? Is it slow? Now I invite you to bring that breath with your next inhale deeper, deep into the belly, feeling the belly button rise and fall with deep, slow, smooth inhales and deep, slow, smooth exhales. Fully experiencing the sensation of the simple act of breathing deeply into the belly. Finding a gentle rhythm in this deep breath. Noticing any thoughts that may come into the mind and simply letting them go. Gently returning to the sensation of the breath. Breathing in, know that you are breathing in. Breathing out, know that you are breathing out. And to continue to cultivate more sensitivity to the sensations of breathing, I invite you to explore the subtle pause in between the inhale and the exhale, and the exhale and the inhale. Noticing this subtle pause in between breaths, similar to an ocean wave creeping up the beach and subtly pausing before it gently recedes back into the ocean. Exploring this stillness between the breaths, exploring this stillness between the thoughts. As the mind will naturally wander, thoughts will come and go. We can gently bring our breath back to this deep rhythm, seeking out new sensations within the body. Breathing deeply and exhaling fully. Now I invite you to allow your breath to resume a natural rhythm. Allow the breath to become automatic once again. And simply notice any changes within the body or the mind. Exploring the sensation of this natural breath cycle. Where is the breath going? When you're comfortable, you can slowly open your eyes. I invite you to thank your body for the hard work that it's done for you. And thank yourself for showing up tonight for yourself. I thank you for this opportunity to join you all this evening. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Dakota, for bringing your practice to us. And Michelle, thank you for your son and his beauty and what he's brought to us tonight. I'm going to take you off screen now, Dakota, so you don't have to sit there for the entire hour while I do this. Thanks for taking your time after your shift to share this with us.
Absolutely. Have a good night. Be well.
Bye. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. Like I said, I don't have a pre-planned speech this evening to necessarily share with you, so I'm going to just take questions and answers. Of course, as always, I'll riff off of that and share some of my thoughts. So let's start with what Becky's question is. Becky says, a question about boundaries. I have not used them well in my parenting. I was a permissive parent that would then get upset. After listening to you for a while, then I started to get upset. When I started to get upset, I would tell myself I need a boundary and then declare one. I read one definition that said that boundaries are formed after deep understanding of your values. I feel like that is a long process and I need boundaries now. Thanks so much for your thoughts. Becky, I think I agree with your issue with that definition of boundaries. If we have to wait till having a deep understanding of ourselves to set boundaries, then I think we'll be waiting indefinitely. And we all need boundaries, even from the youngest age. I mean, think about a child, right? A child, I think I shared with you guys the other night that after the pandemic and some stress of that had lasted several days, we had an earthquake here in Salt Lake City, where I live, to wake us all up about 7:10 in the morning. And my wife and I, it shook our whole family, both literally and figuratively. And then when we were gathering around the kitchen counter for breakfast and we were talking, my wife and I started to make some jokes about the end of the world. You know, I mentioned something about a swarm of locusts, that if a swarm of locusts darkens the sky, that I'm out of here. And part of what we were doing was trying to offload some of our anxiety, you know, through humor. But we were really feeling anxious. And my son, 17-year-old son, said, he said to us, I would really like it if you guys wouldn't make jokes about the end of the world because I'm already really stressed and anxious right now, and that just adds to it. And he didn't have to be right. I mean, this is really the principle. He didn't have to be right. He just got to tell us what he liked and what he needed in that moment. The biggest thing I would say to you as a person, as a mother, is the shift that I invite people to make is a shift from being right to being a person, from being right to being a self. And in this way, you don't get to be right anymore. You just get to be a self. And being a self is so much better. So I think I take issue with the exact same complaint that you have about the idea that we have to develop a deep understanding of who we are. We get to like what we like and not like what we don't like. And what I've learned as a father and a therapist as I've grown over the last 20, 25 years is I've learned that I can hold space for my children and my clients even when I have a strong or clear sense that the idea that they're espousing might be not as evolved as it needs to be, right? Or not as evolved as it could be, I will say. So part of what we allow in our families, if my children only get to, for example, if my son only got to set a boundary where he was right and evolved, how fair would that be to him? He just gets to say, I can't handle jokes about the end of the world. So I think there's a fundamental shift that we do in our work when we shift from perfection, from absolutes to just being a human, just being who we are, and stating that truth, exercising that truth in our relationships in the form of a boundary. So I'm absolutely on your same page, or at least what I think you're saying, Becky. Bridget wants to say thank you, Dakota. And then Michelle, your mother, says, thank you for inviting me. So wonderful to see my beautiful boy lead a meditation. Absolutely. Me too. The first thing I learned about working in wilderness therapy in 1996, when I started, the first thing I noticed was how amazing the field guides were, how resilient, strong, resourceful, spiritual, grounded they were. That was the very first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was how resilient the clients were, but I noticed the field guides first. And to live outside with a group of 8 or 9 teens or young adults who are struggling with addiction or struggling with mental health issues, when the weather is not cooperating, when the clients aren't cooperating, to do that for 8 days in a row, you've got to have something special about you. And as we see from Michelle's son, we have it with our staff. Julie says, my 13-year-old son talked about the Four Horsemen coming as a symbol of the end of the world. He showed me a video of someone talking about the Four Horsemen and relating them to current events. He did not seem at all concerned but how do you respond to that without overreacting? You respond really, well, I'm going to talk about overreacting in a second, but I guess my question is, I know that this sounds maybe too simple, and I'll explain it a little bit further, but you respond how you want to. I was teaching at a parent support group in New York City a few months ago. And at one point, in unison, 2 mothers said just about the same thing. They interrupted me while I was talking about holding space for your child, being an adequate container for your child, and slightly different verbiage, but essentially the same thing they said at the same time. So I should just be a doormat to my son or to my daughter, to my child. And of course, I backed up and apologized that I hadn't set the stage or the foundation. And I basically said, you get to set your boundary. So my answer is, if you can hear the talk of the Four Horsemen and it's not triggering or overwhelming for you, then you can. If you can't, then you can't. I was talking to a parent recently where I said, it's okay if you blow up. I mean, if our children and their development is dependent on us not making mistakes, on us being perfect, on us not having moments where we blow up or say the wrong thing, if their development and well-being is dependent upon that, then they're doomed. Period. But what we try to model for them in this work is we try to model for them the idea that we're a person. And we come back after those moments and we apologize. And then they realize 2 things. Mom and dad, or dad, are taking care of themselves. Like, they're okay. And they're letting me be mad at them, which means I'm not taking care of them anymore, so I'm safe. And they're also teaching me what it's like to be a human, to be a person, to be a flawed, fallible human self. And just think of the freedom that comes to a child when they're allowed to be a self, a flawed, fallible, beautiful, dark, light, scared, happy, angry, frustrated, joyful, agitated self, right? When you get to be more and more of a whole person, including warts and all, just think about how free that is. Think about for you all what it would be like if you could just be you, if you didn't have to measure yourself against perfection, if you didn't beat yourself up with guilt or shame for the mistakes or the dents that you have in your child, that you've made in your child. Think about the kind of freedom that would come with that way of being. And that's what you're modeling for your child. So there's the epigraph of one of my I think it's chapter 3 of my new book on finding others, relationship with others. It's a quote that I found on the internet, and I contacted the author because it was just a quote that he put on his Instagram, or I should say they put on their Instagram. The quote was, a boundary is the distance between me and you where I can love me and you simultaneously. Think about that. A boundary is the distance between me and you where I can love me and you simultaneously. And there are times when my children, as they grow up, they overwhelm me with things they say, and I have to take space and walk away. And there are times, and if I compare myself now at 52 years of age to myself at 32 years of age or 28 years of age, when my first son was just a small child, if I compare myself to that, I have much more bandwidth than I did then. But I've also learned to be able to say, this is my limit and I can't go any farther. And I've also learned to carry around my horrible, rotten self when I make a mistake and apologize without a great deal of self-punishment and self-hatred. Right? That's the work. That's the evolution. So thank you, Julie. I told him that you could find those signs in any given year if you look hard enough. You're right. And I think that's the instinct. So if you can hold space for him, if you do, and if you can't, you don't. And then you get to decide. And then he has to deal with a human parent, you. Becky says this, thank you. And how can you manage that your boundaries are respected? What if you kept talking about the end of the world? I am thinking about my communication with my 17-year-old son. Well, then there are consequences, right? There are limits, right? I mean, I'm not going to take you to the nuclear option, right? Which is, in some cases, the nuclear option is sending your child away to treatment or divorce or, not allowing your young adult child to live with you. Like that's the nuclear option. That's the end of the road, so to speak. But there are an infinite number of steps before that, like taking space, walking away. And I want to just point this out. All of your attempts to enforce a boundary will be met with resistance initially, especially if there's a pattern of not setting and holding boundaries. Harriet Lerner calls it the obnoxious phase. She says that when people first start to set boundaries, this is from her book, The Dance of Anger, that when people first start to set boundaries, she says that they often go through an obnoxious period or phase where it's really abrupt and harsh and dramatic. But over time, they can become more graceful. So you enforce them, and you're going to expect what she calls push back, right? Change back messages. She calls them change back, I believe. So you have to kind of prepare yourself for that, know where your vulnerabilities are with the change back messages. She's actually, when she's talking about this idea and first introduces it, she's talking about an adult mother holding a boundary with her aging father, which lends itself to parents setting boundaries with children or with spouses or with friends. This boundary keeping stuff is really, really hard work. But we can take small steps. I think what most people try to do initially is they try to explain the boundary. They try to talk the other person into some kind of ideological consensus, right? If I can convince you of the principle, that's kind of what you did with the Four Horsemen response, right? If I can convince you of something, then you just won't behave that way. If I can convince you that you're wrong or that my way of thinking or approaching or being is right, then I won't have to set a boundary because you'll stop the behavior. It's much harder to say, I'm going to step out of the room, or I can't listen to that, or I can't participate in this discussion. That's a boundary. But debating, arguing, pleading, begging, nagging, lecturing is not a boundary. When students first come to our program, their initial experience with each other is they try all of those other things. And that's kind of the first stage for many people of boundary setting is we try to talk to other people into our way of being so we don't have to set a boundary. So Becky says, oh, I already read that. That was the one I just answered. Any other thoughts that people want to share with the comments that have been made or any questions? How are you all finding peace and serenity in these times? I'll talk for a minute. I was talking to somebody today about this, about how that our collective experience right now is that there is something obvious hanging over all of us that we cannot control. That's the pandemic. It's a shared collective experience that we're all having, and it's causing this kind of global anxiety that we would argue is well deserved, right? It's earned. It's not irrational in most cases. But I think what it's doing for us is it's creating a scenario that people that struggle with anxiety on a daily basis or addiction on a daily basis, people that struggle in areas of mental health on a daily basis, I think it's giving us a glimpse into what everyday life is like for them. And it's not like there are two piles of mental health, like there's mental health and mental illness. There's a whole continuum in between, and we fall somewhere on that continuum. But the people that struggle with more acute cases of mental illness and addiction, we can have a sense of what they feel like, which is that the peace that I seek is out there. And the reality that we're all experiencing is that we can't stop the pandemic. We can social distance, we can shelter in place, right? We can wash our hands. We can limit our interactions with people. We can do what we can do. We can find activities and mindfulness, a mindfulness practice. We can do all of that. But we're confronted with the reality that somebody that struggles with a mental illness or addiction faces it in a very difficult way each day, which is the peace that I want eludes me. And how can I find it? And so I think we're being asked by this pandemic to take the heroic journey inward, to realize that the enemy and therefore the solution is not out there, but in here. And that if we are to find peace, it's going to be from a dive inward. That's why I think that I've lowered the book prices. This is a time to read. This is a time to look inward, an opportunity to look inward. I have another thought while a couple of people are typing right now. A few people are typing right now. And that is that I think it's so easy to move from an idea to an imperative for most of us. I talked about this last night, from the idea of cultivating gratitude, for example, to translating that very quickly to be grateful. You know, if we say to our children or to each other, you should be grateful, we've just erased an invitation for them to be themselves. And I think the idea of cultivating gratitude or cultivating serenity, like Dakota just helped us to do with his practice, I think that's a different thing than an imperative. I used to say that the commandments in the scriptures, Old and New Testament, in my way of thinking as a therapist, aren't necessarily commandments, but they are kind of a way of being, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself is not a commandment I used to suggest, but it's just the way that the world works. And that the ideas in religions are, if you cultivate this practice, this idea, if you embody this principle, this attribute, this characteristic, you'll find greater peace and meaning in this life. And it's so automatic and easy for most of us to take that idea and turn it into a should. You should. You must. The luxury I have as a therapist, instead of being a rabbi or a priest or a cleric or a bishop, the luxury that I have is that I can't tell you what to do, but I can talk to you about the ideas, a way of being that might offer you, with some practice, a way of being that gives you peace. All right, some comments are coming in. Julie says, my 16-year-old daughter is currently at Evoke. She is approaching the milestone of aftercare. Has there been, or do you foresee any problems transitioning clients to aftercare? This next step causes me anxiety, as is, but with COVID-19, it is escalated. I'm taking a deep breath just to calm myself because I feel the anxiety. I think it's day to day. I think it's placement by placement. Overall, the schools and programs that children and young adults go to after our program are remaining open and functional and safe. And if you go to their various websites, I mean, right now, this will only apply to this period of time in our history, right? You go to their website, you talk to their admissions counselor, and you ask them for their policies and what they're doing to keep people safe and keep themselves functioning and open. So I think it's specific. Do I foresee some challenges? Yes. Do I think that it closes the doors that you need for you and your child to move forward in therapy and be safe? Not ultimately, no. And it's kind of a hierarchy of needs, right? COVID, of course, is a threat, especially to the elderly and other people that are compromised like myself, who are on an immuno suppressant drug, like I am for my multiple sclerosis. But our children, and I've been in your situation more than once, our children are at a place where we feel like they are at risk in other areas. And even their behavior is going to put them at greater risk for COVID if they come home or come back to New York, for example. So my answer is yes and no, and I don't know. And I think it's a conversation to have with each individual site and to talk about them. And I think we're starting to get into a place where things are where we can see some consistency. Like, I'm less and less surprised about the arc and the uptick in cases and what we're seeing. It seems to be more predictable for us all. But as you know, as well as I do, all of you, what we thought a week ago isn't true today. And what we might think a week from now, we might not have considered today. So I wish I could be more reassuring and more complete in my answer, but that's my answer. Robin says, I am having a hard time putting into words my continuing struggles with setting boundaries with my kids that are in college. It is a transition away from children in the house to adult children. You know, first of all, I haven't said this tonight, and it's time for me to say it. Thank you for sharing. You're not alone. Thank you, all of you, for showing up, whether it be your name or the things that you're asking or struggling with. You're not alone. And anybody who wants to comment on any other parent's comment, you absolutely are welcome to offer any of your own experience, strength, and hope to other people here. It's a challenge to transition to new circumstances and kind of norms and rules, right? You know, the longer I do this work, the more fundamental I find the work to be, meaning a few layers deep, it's the same kind of work. My new book, The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self, is that work. I was just recording an audio version of it today. I'm in the middle of doing that right now, and I'm going to be having that produced and released here in the next month or so. And I'm aware that while there are differences between children and adult children, spouses, friends, colleagues, a family of origin. There are differences in all of those various circumstances. There's something fundamental in each of those that remains constant and the same. And it is the discovery of self and our ability to kind of figure out what our relationship is to the other and to speak our truth and to hold our place. So I don't have an answer to you to tell you how to do it, but just to empathize with you and understand along with you that that's the work, right? That's the work that we're all working on. It's why I have such a hard time asking questions that start off with, what should I do? Because it's so much more elemental than that. It's so much more um, at a depth that far surpasses any answer to the question, what should I do? So you're not alone. That's why these broadcasts, all of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app, right? Our Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. That's why it's about learning to listen. It's about why we ask you to go to 12-step meetings like Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous or Refuge Recovery. That when you do that, when you do that work, you sit in a room and listen to people who have similar struggles, and you start to hear the themes, the ideas. What do I do? What does one do? Now, this person sitting next to me on my right at this support group, they might be talking about an alcoholic spouse. But there's something in their story that I can hear if I listen well enough that can apply to my story of dealing with my 7-year-old son, my 17-year-old daughter, or my 27-year-old child. And again, I have the luxury of having children that are spread out. My oldest is 27, my youngest is 12. And I have found through my lifespan with them that those constant themes that run all the way through. And it's really required me to understand, again, the depth beneath all of it. So thank you, Robin, for sharing that. Tatiana says, I actually consider that time as a gift. Of course, I am not talking about people who are at great health risk, for people who can die, people already gone. But the part of the situation when the world needs to slow down, be with yourself with permission to stop completely. I have more time for a thoughtful connection over the phone with my son, with close friends, and more importantly, with myself. That part is a gift at my mandatory quarantine after my return from Europe. I've seen that evolution, Tatiana, with people on these broadcasts. From the first one that I did, I think it was maybe a week ago yesterday, I've started to notice that people, as they've shifted to a more kind of grounded internal state, a more focused inward state, that they've had the experiences of gratitude that you're describing, an opportunity to slow down. And I can relate to that. I feel much differently 12 days into my self-imposed quarantine, my social distancing, than I did day 1, 2, and 3. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So thank you for sharing. Robin says, just started the book. I think it will be a good one for me on this stage of my journey. I hope so. I'm excited to hear what you think. To those with kids in wilderness, we were there 5 years ago when he was 15. I will tell you, he is more evolved as a true self with boundaries than any of us. Evoke was amazing for him. Thank you for sharing that. There's something that children get out of this that it's very difficult to get any other ways. There's something that parents get out of this that it's difficult to get any other way. Beth says, I keep trying to stay in the moment and looking for ways to be helpful. People are sewing masks, and I can sew, but I wonder if the ones people are making can really be effective. Maybe it doesn't matter if they are or they aren't. The idea is just feeling like I'm doing what I can in the world that feels so out of control. Yeah, I think there's this balance, right? I've been finding, large chunks of time where I'm in my purpose, reading my book, right? Recording my book for, like I said the other day, it's going to take me it'll probably be about, I think about a 5 or 6 hour book in the end. I think that's what I'm told. And it'll probably take me about 15 hours to record it because I stammer and stutter so much and mispronounce words so much, like I just did in that sentence. But for close to 3 hours today, I didn't think of the coronavirus. Not at all. And not that we want to escape all the time from the inward journey, but it's okay to have a relief. And so maybe sewing masks that may or may not be helpful can give you that relief. So I think it's kind of both, isn't it? It's finding moments of purpose, working on a puzzle, watching a documentary or a comedy skit, a comedy show, right? Any variation of all the things that everybody's suggesting. And then there's an opportunity also to sit and to feel and to pass through the emotions. And I think it's I mean, that's almost always the answer, isn't it? It's all of it. It's becoming a whole self and experiencing all of it. And I think anytime we start to think in terms of, in fact, there's a saying that somebody shared with me a couple of weeks ago on one of these podcasts that I do, interviewing somebody. She said, when somebody tells you there's one way, run away, right? And to realize that life ultimately is about balance and integration. That for me, gratitude comes when I'm allowed to feel everything, especially as I increase my mindfulness on what I'm experiencing. Thank you, Beth. Michelle says, how do you move on when you have done everything in your power to help your child and you are back at square one, now having to be confined to your home with your child's mental illness? Where's the help? Part of it is tonight. I wish I could offer more relief, but you just sharing and me just listening and the rest of us just listening, hopefully as part of that. When I was first diagnosed with MS, I shared this story already this week once, but when I was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, of which there is no cure, and there's a very good chance that I could die from complications of this disease that I was diagnosed with about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I was driving home from the hospital where I had just found out. My wife was in another car because we'd come to the hospital separately, and I called a 26-year-old friend, really my son's friend, one of the Osmonds, Tyler Osmond, to be specific. He's the son of Alan Osmond, the oldest of the Osmond boys, if any of you know who that is. Tyler, I think, is 27, 28 now. I called him a few years ago, and I called him, and I knew his father had MS because he's famous. His brother, David, has MS, and he's a spokesperson for one of the drugs that's helping with MS these days. So I knew that Tyler had some experience with it. His aunt has it. So I called Tyler and I said, Tyler, I was just diagnosed with MS. And I couldn't say it, of course, without breaking down in tears because it was really fresh. I didn't know what I needed from him. And all Tyler said to me in his 25, 26-year-old wisdom was, I love you, and you're not alone, and you never will be. And that was all he could do, right? He couldn't offer a cure. He couldn't offer a solution. He could just offer his company. And I realized that that's all I needed from him. I felt some peace wash over me. And so some things are unfixable. Other people are unfixable. Other people's addictions or mental illness are unfixable for us. So we gather in circles, we gather on webinars in this case, or in Zoom meetings, or in small groups, and we tell our story to somebody who can hear it and they offer us the comfort of their company. I, I think a lot of us don't have a lot of experience with being faced with problems that we can't solve until, of course, we have children or get married. Remember the Serenity Prayer from AA that some of you know very well, have it memorized. Some of you might say it all the time. Some of you, it might be new to you, but I'm going to share it with you. It's a prayer that is said at virtually the start of every or end of every 12-step support meeting in the world every day. I'm going to share it with you if you don't know it, or just remind you or invite you into it. If you don't have a belief in a higher power, you can skip the God part and just think of it as a serenity meditation. It's just 3 simple sentences. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. 3 simple phrases, right? That's the practice. That's what people who have a loved one struggling with mental illness or addiction say every day at their meetings. That's what individuals struggling with addiction of any form say every day at their meetings. Grant me the serenity. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Sometimes at Codependence Anonymous meetings or Al-Anon, they say it like this. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, other people, the courage to change the things I can, myself, and the wisdom to know the difference. We have to repeat a prayer to remind ourselves what we're in control of and what we're not. And virtually it can almost be designated by other people and ourselves. So thank you for sharing. Share it with others. We're in this together. There's a spiritual work that can come out of this as we develop a practice around this work. And our children are the unwitting teachers of these lessons. And the coronavirus is the uninvited schoolmaster to teach us this right now. Julie says to Tatiana, I totally relate to the slowdown. I am working from home now and find myself less stressed and more engaged with my 13-year-old son. I just need to be on the lookout for a Nerf football being thrown at me at any given moment. These are the new boundaries I am trying to set. He gets it, but is just bored. Oh, Becky asks about the song or the history of the song that's played at the beginning and end of each podcast. I actually quoted the person who wrote the song in the first book and the second book. It's by a band by the name of Desert Noises. In fact, Tyler Osmond is the bass player in that band, so this is all coming together. But you can go to iTunes or Spotify, and the name of the song is called "Follow You Out" by Desert Noises. In the first book, I quoted Kyle Henderson. He's the writer of the song, of the lyrics. It was in one of the chapters, one of the chapter headings. He says something like it's from a song called "Puppet Will" that actually it's only sung live. He says, "I'm sorry for the mess that I've made. If you can open up your ears, you would hear what I have to say." It's about shame. It's at the beginning of the chapter on shame. And in the second book, this is the story where I'm driving from Philadelphia to New York, and I ask a songwriter that I said I admire and like, how do you write lyrical poetry? How do you write songs? Because I've written some poetry too shy or insecure to show it to other people, but how do you write it? And he said to me, I just tell the truth. And then I say in the book, I had no follow-up questions. Right? That's what artists who create great works of art do, is they tell the truth. They have some success with fear, and they just tell the truth. and I could talk about that all evening. So that's the name of it. Desert Noises Band, desertnoises.com, desertnoisesband.com. Keisha just shared that with us. Thank you, Keisha, for joining us. And then you can go there and listen to it. Roshan, am I saying it correctly, Roshan? Am I saying it correctly? Okay. Roshan is sharing this with us, a poem. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. I shared this last night, but I thought about it again today. The famous quote from Ram Dass, where he says, I think it might be the last line of my book, my new book, so I'm ruining the ending for you. Or it's pretty close to the end. He says, we are all just walking each other home. And I find some comfort in that. Does anybody know what's the name? What's that one poem, since we're sharing poems? What's the poem? Oh, I'm forgetting the author's name. It's a German author, maybe even a Jewish German author. I'm not sure, but at the end of Keisha, can you look it up? The one that's at the end of Jojo Rabbit. Just look at poem at the end of by Rivka. Am I saying it right? Rivka. It's a great poem. Keisha, if you would post it for us, that would be great. So Google poem at the end of Jojo Rabbit and post it here, and I'll read it for everybody. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just say hi to everybody tonight. Valentina, Tatiana, Suzette, Sally, Roshan, Robin, Penny, Pam, Michelle, Mary, Lisa, Linda, Laura, Christy, Keisha, Kat, Julie, Jim, Ivana, Giddy, Daphne, Dakota, Charity, Beth, Becky, and Ann. Good to see you all. Some of you I haven't seen in person in a long time. Some of you I've seen very recently. I'll end with that poem before we log out tonight. While I'm doing that, I'll just pull up last night's presentation just to give you some information. Our intensives, which will be starting up again when it's safe, of course. The April 22nd one is tentative right now, of course. May 27th is available. I am now running the July Finding You's twos. So the first one that we opened up, the July 15th one, is already full. And I'll also be running the July 8th one now. Also, all of these broadcasts are available on our podcast app. So you can listen to them on the Apple Podcast app or SoundCloud for Android. The name of the podcast is Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. Both of my books are available on Amazon, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You. And I have lowered, during the pandemic, and social distancing, I've lowered the price to the lowest price that Amazon will allow. Some I don't have control over, some I do. So the Kindle version of The Audacity to Be You is $2.99. And the print is only $10.02. The Journey of the Heroic Parent print version is down to $12.95. I don't have any control over the Kindle version of that. Laura is asking me if I'm familiar with Recovery International. I'm not familiar with it. So, sorry. You're welcome, Roshan. Thank you for sharing what you shared tonight and for your poem. Linda says, thank you for doing these special podcasts, Brad. We have one more again tomorrow. I'm going to bring on one of our therapists for the mindful activity at the beginning also for the meditation. Keisha, are you able to find that? You might have stepped away too. I didn't put you in this role before we started. So did you find that poem? I have 3 people typing. So after I comment or read these things, then I'll close for this evening. Tomorrow night will be at 5:30 Mountain Time. Feel free to share these with colleagues, friends, any groups that you belong to. Share online. Realkey. You're right, Becky. It's Realkey. Roshan asked if I see the kids at Cascades. I do. I'm not traveling right now, though. I don't see all of them all the time, but I go out and work with a therapist and train various therapists, provide supervision at various times, and visit the group. But I won't be traveling until the curve gets flattened with the pandemic. Well, I'll have that Rilke poem to share with you all tomorrow night if I can't have it now. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your audience. Thank you for connecting. Just seeing your names on here brings me a sense of connection, especially for those of you who I know and haven't seen for some time. So it's really great. Laura says, I think the tools work incredibly well, especially for anxiety. Dr. Abraham Lowe has dozens of tools, but most people only need a handful to use throughout their life. An example of a tool is replace an insecure thought with a secure thought. Tools can be very helpful. On our way to enlightenment, tools can absolutely assist us to find peace and meaning and belonging and some relief from suffering for sure. So I'll wait for Beth's comment. What Beth is typing. Thanks, Brad. Love you. Love you too, Beth. All right, folks, have a great evening. I'll talk to you tomorrow night at 5:30. I'll have that Rilke poem for you, or you can look it up yourself, but I'll share it with you anyway tomorrow evening. Again, feel free to share this, invite people. These are open to the public, and I appreciate you connecting with us here tonight. Take care. Thank you again, Dakota, for sharing your practice with us. Talk to you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.